Welcome. I think we're going to get started here. We'll give it a go. Just by way of curiosity, how many of you are familiar with the Progymnasmata? Okay, good. All 7 of you. That's fantastic. So this will be great. I was partially anticipating this, and so hopefully those 7 of you who raised your hand aren't bored. But I am going to walk you through the Progymnasmata in some detail. Those of you who are familiar with it, hopefully it will be an opportunity for you to ponder it in a different way. I would submit to you the quote that I have used a few times this week, and that I will certainly end with again. But this Progymnasmata presentation fits within that realm, and I would submit to you that it fits very well. We need the liberal arts to distinguish God's voice from the devil's, and to equip ourselves to rightly be good stewards of all resources and serve God through our neighbor. And this idea of our neighbor must always be central to what we are doing in our classrooms, because we are not educated for our own sake, and we do not educate our children, our scholars, for their own sake, but we educate them for the sake of their neighbor who needs their good works. The Progymnasmata, I would submit for your consideration, is an excellent way to form our scholars for service of their neighbor. Many times when we think Progymnasmata, if we have even heard the word, we think of writing exercises because that's how it's been introduced. But what I would like to have you ponder is that this is actually a way that we form their thinking. Not what to think, but how to think, especially as it relates to their neighbor. And hopefully that becomes clear as we proceed forward. So the Progymnasmata, what is it? Progymnasmata is preliminary exercises. It was written during the Roman period and studied throughout the Byzantine period. And it held on a little bit longer than that, but then it died. And that's why most of us have not heard of it. But I think as we get more familiar with the Progymnasmata, and not as something that we just do in a workbook, but actually as something that is challenging and forming our thinking, we're going to think differently about the way we do Lutheran education. I think, and this is just me, and I know I'm biased and opinionated, but I think the Progymnasmata is the thing that we've been missing. And so if nothing else comes from this presentation today, I would submit to you, I would implore you to ponder it in terms of how it can impact your teaching at all levels as Lutherans. Think Quintilian, the Institutes of Oratory. The Institutes of Oratory were about the formation of the orator, right? And is that not what we are about? Does Scripture not exhort us to be prepared in season and out of season to give a good confession, to give an apology for that which is our hope? And so are we not, on some level, perhaps on every level, forming orators? And do we view the life of the Christian under the cross as the life of an orator. Theon, in his preface of the Exercises, said, "The ancient rhetoricians, and especially those who have become famous, did not think," my apologies for the typo, "did not think one should come to rhetoric at all before grasping philosophy to some extent and being filled with the greatness of mind that comes from this source. Now, however, most students are so far from appreciating such studies that they rush into public speaking without even getting a knowledge of what are called general studies. And what is most boorish of all, they proceed to debate judicial and deliberative hypotheses without having been practiced in the proper way. As the proverb says, learning pottery making by starting with a big jar." And so I would submit to you that along with Theon, we should absolutely be concerned with giving our scholars a lot about which they can orate. How can they orate on something they haven't learned? If there is any time in history that is affirming this for us, it's right now. People, I'm not going to use the word orate because they're not orating, they're bloviating. People bloviate on anything and everything because they read a meme on the internet and therefore now they're an expert. I don't know if any of you have ever watched C-SPAN, but there's a lot of bloviation that goes on a regular basis in our halls of government. And what if we prepared scholars by giving them the tools of oration, even as we help form their minds to give a good confession? And so I submit to you that the Progymnasmata is not just a series of tools to put in their tool belt, but it is actually the formation that is turning them into a good confessor. Now, this book here, Progymnasmata, Greek textbooks of prose composition and rhetoric, is fantastic. It's the actual text translated. I would highly recommend getting a hold of it, even if this is not necessarily what you teach. It should be informing what you do in every content area that you do teach. You can see up here the kind of breakdown, and this will make more sense as we go on to the next slide. We are going to most closely follow Apthonius in terms of how he lays out the Progymnasmata, but this gives you the idea that, okay, so here is this body of knowledge, but some guys organized it a little bit differently. Okay, so what I want you to know is that as we walk through this, that there's not necessarily been throughout time and history one way to do the Progymnasmata, okay? But the point is that the Progymnasmata was formation. It was seen as formative. So these are the 14 steps, and hopefully they're not too small for you. But these are the 14 steps in the formation of the orator. And they build upon one another, and as they do, they challenge the orator in progress to consider how he relates to his neighbor. We see this, how we relate to our neighbor, in the 10 Commandments, right? And so you will see as we go along that the Progymnasmata affirms that which we know to be true in God's word. And especially having our neighbor in mind and the fact that the Ten Commandments protect those relationships. The Progymnasmata shows us how to relate to our neighbor and shows us eloquently how to tell him that he has no idea what he's talking about, which can be an art, right? So, just as a basic overview, fable is a retelling of a story with a moral. That's pretty straightforward. And with fable, we have our eye on the fact, we know that with fable, the most famous part of a fable, right, is, and the moral of the story is, fill in the blank, right? Slow and steady wins the race. That's how we'll approach this presentation. Slow and steady wins the race. No, I'm just kidding. But it shows scholars, it shows future orators that what they say needs to have a point. Fables are not long stories, and the choices made in fables are specific, and everything has meaning. We'll dive more deeply into this as we dig into these more deeply. So 2 is narrative, a retelling of a story from given facts. 3 is crea or anecdote, a retelling of what a person said. A proverb is similar, and we'll get into this more in a moment. A summary declarative statement recommending or condemning something, to praise or refute a proverbial saying. Refutation and confirmation go really well together. Refutation is an attack on an opposite view, and confirmation is defending an alleged fact or event. Some of our Progymnasmata textbook writers actually combined these, or just used one and used the converse to get the job done. Encomium is praise, 7 is commonplace, declaration against general vices. When we dig deeper into this, you'll realize that the way the Progymnasmata uses commonplace is not necessarily the way that you view commonplace as you think of it right now, but they're not necessarily opposed. Encomium, praise a particular person or thing. Subjects include persons, things, places, animals, etc., etc. Vituperation or invective, you are condemning a particular person or thing. Comparison, this is where we usually start, isn't it? In terms of teaching young scholars, we teach them to compare. Well, how are they going to compare when they haven't been taught to notice distinctions, right? So hopefully the Progymnasmata challenges the way you consider the formation of your scholars as writers and orators and thinkers. Because we know that the way we think is the way we write, and the way we write is the way we think, and the way we think is the way we speak, right? When you get a letter from your grandma and you read her writing, you can hear her voice, right? And that's what our goal is for our scholars, is that they would develop their voice so that they can participate in the love and service of their neighbor, because that's why we're here. Impersonation. We write in the voice and style of a particular character, and this is an incredibly fun one. Description. You are bringing the subject clearly before the eyes, and then 13 and 14 really bring it all together. A thesis or a theme, you are arguing an undecided subject, right? So we get into argumentation and debate with the goal of then defending or attacking a law. We are arguing for or against, ultimately, the fact that there is truth. And this is making the good confession. So let's dig more deeply, just briefly. So a fable, and I'm not going to read through all of this because all of you know how to read, but it's helpful to see how to compose these different steps of the Progymnasmata, because it allows you to see more clearly the point of each of the steps, right? So as we think about fables, characters are paramount, right? Characters mean something. And character means something, right? If you are of a certain character, that means you do a certain thing. And so we just project that onto animals or objects or men in our fables. And so it's important to think about these things in terms of, okay, so if I have a donkey, necessarily what sort of character should he be? This is the audience participation point so that you make sure that you stay awake. So if I have a donkey, he should be what? He should be stubborn. That's a known, right? And if I have a fox, he should be clever, right? Okay, so these things are universals, okay? Aesop gave us a great gift in his fables. But one of the things that sometimes we don't highlight enough is the fact that he gave us the opportunity to understand that you are going to be judged by what you do, right? And that's going to give you a reputation. And so this is a really fantastic lesson in terms of how we relate to our neighbor, because who we are to our neighbor is going to be how they consider us. Okay? So, and then you write out your plot and you conclude with your moral. Everything has a point. So from the very beginning of the formation of our young orators, we are teaching them to have a point. This is not necessarily a strong point of young people, if you've ever heard them tell a story. And sometimes when you go on the internet and you try to engage with people, it's not the strong point of anyone, because they don't actually have a point. They just want to use a lot of words to try to convince you of something. All right, this one's a little bit smaller, but narrative is a retelling of a story from given facts, right? This is your typical who, what, when, where, how, and why. Sometimes we skip the why. Don't skip the why, because it forces your scholars to ponder intent, right? And this is very important in their formation, because not only do they need to have a point, right? There needs to be an end goal for what they are saying, but they also need to have a purpose, right? And there's a fine line of distinction between those two, but having a purpose forms the words they use, the method of delivery that they use, all of these things. We have purpose. And narratives are really fun, especially when you explore them in these different modes. Talk about relating to your neighbor. So you have omniscient eyewitness mode. Okay, so you're there, you're telling the story. That's pretty typical. That's generally how we do narrative. Vicarious, you heard it from the lady down the street. Interrogative is one of my favorites. The entire thing is a series of questions. You tell the events that happened all through questions. It's fantastic. And it's difficult. Enumerative, you choose a side and you tell the story from that perspective. And so this right away introduces to your scholars the fact that there's more than one side to things. And that's really important. We know that's important as parents, right? Especially if we have more than one child, that there's always two sides to the story. Anyone who is married might also have had that experience, but maybe not. Maybe you have always ever agreed, always down to the most basic detail. But this is essential in terms of how we relate to our neighbor, to be able to see things from his perspective. How many people out there today are willing, let alone able, to see something from someone else's perspective? The statistics are abysmal at best. And then comparative, you're retelling a story suggesting the possibility of a better outcome. Number 3, crea or anecdote. And you, as we go through these, you might be saying, well, they kind of are starting to sound the same, but the nuance is key. All right? So this is a retelling of what a person said. Okay? And this is where we start to ponder the idea that the Progymnasmata affirms the 10 Commandments, right? There are very few better ways to teach about the 8th commandment than the Progymnasmata. And hopefully you'll see that as we go through this, okay? So you are retelling, and the key in this is that you are picking out something good that happened and you're amplifying that, okay? It's the art of speaking well to express succinctly what our neighbor said for the edification of our neighbor. Wouldn't it be amazing if everyone knew how to do this? So the steps involved in that is that you are going to amplify the account, right? You're going to make it larger. You're going to praise it. And you are going to say what was done. You're going to give proof. You're going to introduce a contrast, right? What may have been done otherwise. And then you're going to give an example of what you mean by this, right? Give them the big picture. Why does it matter? Remember, we introduced that in narrative. All of these things build. This is formation. This is not a checklist. And if there's one thing that you remember from this, let it be that the Progymnasmata is not a checklist, okay? It is formation. And then we support what this person has done or said with the testimony of someone else, right? This person, this was a great thing to say because so-and-so said a similar thing and they are a person of good character. And so we are building up and uplifting the speaker with the testimony of someone else by way of what they have said or done. And then, of course, we always wrap it up with an epilogue or a conclusion. And you'll see that as pretty standard throughout the Progymnasmata. Okay, slightly different then is number 4 in so far as the emphasis. Okay, a proverb, pretty straightforward. A summary declarative statement recommending or condemning something, praising or refuting a proverbial saying. Now, the key with this is it's all about what they did or what was said, and the character of the speaker is not important. It's all about the statement, okay? And so what does this show our young people? We can learn even from the pagans, can't we? I think we heard that this morning. And so with that, sometimes we emphasize who said it because it matters. And sometimes what they said is good just because they said it. And who said it is less important. We sometimes have to be able to separate those things, and that's what proverb gives us. Refutation is an attack on an opposite view. Okay? So we are attacking the credibility of something, and whoever did it is important. Okay? But we're not breaking the 8th commandment when we do this. We are simply relaying the facts as they have presented themselves and showing point blank why whatever was done was evil or not virtuous. Okay? And so this is important. The character of the doer or the holder of the opinion is important. Because you hold this opinion and this is what has formed you, I'm calling into question what you said. I'm not making up things about whomever said this, but I'm considering the speaker in all of this. We are attacking the viewpoint, right? We are attacking something as being obscure, incredible, meaning not like, oh, that's incredible, but incredible, like it's not possible, illogical, unfitting, and unprofitable. It's not good, don't do it, and this is why. Confirmation is the opposite of that, okay? The reason this thing is a good thing is because whoever said it or did it is also good, is also virtuous. And so do this, and the character of the person matters. The story is manifest, probable, possible, logical, fitting, profitable, and part of that is and has to do with whoever did it or said it. So confirmation and refutation work really well together, and you can take the same situation and look at it from opposite viewpoints, right? Two people said something about the same situation, and one is good and one is not good, and part of it is because of who said it, right? And so this is important. In all of this, you're going to see that distinction. Being able to call sin, sin, and being able to call good, good, is so fundamental for our children. Because the world would call good evil and evil good. And they need to be able to distinguish and make a case for the fact that evil is evil and good is good, and people do evil things and people do good things. And they need to be able to see that. All right, commonplace is a declaration against general vices. A lot of times when we think commonplace, we think topics and quotes that go under them, right? Commonplace, you are making a case against vice. If we jump down to the bottom, you are considering it according to some different topics. The legality, the justice, the expediency, the practicability, the decency, and the consequences. If you read the ancients, you see them doing this, right? You see Socrates do this quite frequently in his discussions in Plato's dialogues. And so these are good models in the Progymnasmata. Having models for how these things work is really essential. So commonplace, we are making a declaration against general vice, right? And you can see in the directions for composition, you can see some of the previous tools coming into play, right? So this isn't something that is out of the blue. They already have these skills at the ready to employ as they make their case. Encomium is praising a particular person or thing. Okay? So with this, we are praising that which is virtuous. We've identified that which is not virtuous. We've identified that which is virtuous. And now we really start to focus in on who is virtuous, the person, right? Where they're from, who their ancestors are, their parents, right? When God says that the sins of the fathers, right? Who your parents are, some of us have escaped some of that, but some of that still clings, right? Think about your own families. Your stock, as the ancients would say, has an impact on your formation. And so we bring that into the picture because it makes an impact on why someone has done what they have done. You are describing the person's deeds with discussing mind, body, and position, right? And so all of these things, we want to elevate them to establish that there's a distinction, that it's okay to be virtuous. And finally, we want to make sure that we end with, so be like this guy, right? I've just given you all the reasons, so be like this guy. And the reason that we can do this, right? We're on step 8. The reason that we're doing this is so that we can notice who we should emulate, right? But how do you know who you should emulate if you haven't considered rightly what is worth emulating? So it's not just a matter of, well, he makes a lot of money, so that means I should be like him. He wears the best clothes, so I should be like him. You consider all of the things that go into who a person is, and in so doing, you are challenged in your own formation that I want to be that guy, so I need to make sure that what is forming me is distinctive. Maybe not for my sake, but maybe for the sake of my children. Next, we come to vituperation or invective, okay? So where we were just praising, now we are condemning. And you'll notice that the directions for composition, it's all the same stuff, right? So in terms of, in vituperation, in the next one, in comparison, you're going to see that it's all the same, all right? What your stock, your education, your instruction in art, your training in the laws, the things that have formed you matter. And then you conclude with, don't be like this guy, okay? But again, we're judging rightly, and I would submit to you that the reason we're judging in this way is for the sake of our neighbor. All of this, as we go through this, we need to keep that in mind. This is for the sake of your neighbor and how you relate to him. For his good, for your good. Comparison. You are comparing particular things based on all of the things that we have seen already. You are praising two in close comparison, or praising one and vituperating against the other. Okay? This is a comparison. The reason that they are compared is because they are related. Okay? And so a lot of times when we do writing, when we do literature analysis, we start with this, right? Notice that this is step 10. Do our scholars have that which they need to make a good comparison? And I would submit to you that if they're not able to judge rightly on these marks, that we should be taking a step back and not have them do that which they are not prepared to do. So, again, at the end, we are exhorting our hearers to either do and be like that person, or not do or be like that person. And this is a judgment on us as well. As we are saying, don't be like that guy, we are affirming for ourselves not to be like that guy. It's kind of like, as you teach, you learn. As these things form your scholars in how they relate to their neighbor, they also form the scholars themselves. 11, impersonation. And this is fantastic. Impersonation is so fun. You are picking up the voice of someone else, right? In rhetoric, we really work to develop the voice of the orator. And the Progymnasmata sets the scholars up to do that by having them find the voice of someone else and emulate it. Our children do this, don't they? But this is showing them what they should consider when they are emulating, when they are picking up a voice, and therefore how to develop their own voice. So you consider clarity, conciseness, fluidity. You consider all of these things, and past, present, and future. So voice does not happen in a vacuum. A lot goes into emulating a voice, but also developing a voice. 12, description. Okay? This is bringing the subject clearly before the eyes. Again, a lot of times this is where we start. And I would submit to you that how do they describe something when they don't have the means, the words, the vocabulary to describe it? I think sometimes we jump to the end thinking they'll feel really good about themselves, when really we're taking them out at the knees and not equipping them to rightly do these things. Now, this isn't to say that we don't observe things. Obviously, all along, we're observing things, but we're observing things out there. Maybe you are going to stay with fable for a really long time because your scholars need to understand what goes into someone's character as they form characters, right? That who you are is a collection of the things that you do. And so with description, we're employing figures of speech, right? And looking at things sequentially, descriptively, all of this. All right, now we have come to the end, to thesis or theme, and you are arguing an undecided subject. You'll see in this that all of the previous steps are needed in order to be able to do this. So when you ask your young scholars to write a thesis, you are asking a lot of them. And maybe what you're actually asking of them is to write the moral of a fable. And so I want to challenge you to think about these things really deeply in terms of what we are asking of our scholars. Maybe this is all wrong. Maybe the way we're doing it is perfectly fantastic. But at the very least, I want us to ponder this. And I want us to think about, just because we've always done it this way, is that the way we should continue doing it? Maybe there's another way that we should consider. And that can be kind of scary, because that means that we have to think about these things and we can't just do what we've always done. In this, as we consider a thesis or theme, you are going to consider your arguments based on legality, justice, expediency, practicability, decency, and consequences. So all of these things take high-level processing, and they need knowledge, and they need experience, and they need judgment and distinction. All of these things, you are basically saying, here I stand. And this is where we want our scholars to be. We want to equip them to stand firm. That is the life of the Christian. Are we well equipping our scholars to stand firm in the face of persecution? Life has been really easy up till now. It might be really easy going forward. Maybe Jesus will come back tomorrow and we won't have to worry about this. But if he doesn't, then we do need to be about equipping our scholars to stand firm, to be able to have a point, to be able to relate to their neighbor in such a way that calls sin, sin, for the sake of their neighbor's salvation. This is not light stuff in which we are engaging. Everything you do in your home and in the classroom means something, and it has lasting consequence. And these children, Lord willing, are going to have families of their own. And we want them to form their children in such a way to stand firm in the face of persecution and to give a confession for the hope that they have. We want them to have the words. We want them to know all of the things. But ultimately, our end goal is heaven. And we want them to be able to say, here I stand here because this is truth. And I know that that's not truth, and here are all the reasons. Do you see how the Progymnasmata has set them up to think in that manner? We don't just say things because it feels good and it feels right and I think I'm on the right path. We say things because we have proof, because we know. And I guarantee it's going to make your life difficult, because you're not going to be able to pull the wool over your scholars' eyes and say, well, isn't that just nice? They're going to say, well, why is that nice? And then you're going to have to prove it. but the thing that is forming them is the thing that is going to equip them. Finally, we want them to be able to defend or attack a law, that which has been said to be true. There are a lot of laws that are thrown around these days, and I'm not necessarily talking about that which goes on in government, but more so that which is claimed to be absolute truth. Your scholars are going to know absolute truth because that's what Scripture is all about. But we need them to be able to defend it, to know why it is true. When someone says, "What does this mean?" they will have the answer. And these things are important. 1 Peter 3:13 through 17 says, "Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." That's what the Progymnasmata teaches. It teaches you to give a reason with gentleness and respect. You're able to call a sin, and you're able to call a virtue, and you have lots of reasons behind it because you've been formed to think that way. Having a good conscience so that when you are slandered, not if you are slandered, but when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. You, as parents and Lutheran educators, are teaching your scholars how to die. This is the life of the Christian. We live under the cross. And if we are presenting the life of a Christian as daisies and roses, then we're not setting our scholars up for success. There is blessing under the cross, and we don't deny that. Family, children, all of the good gifts that God gives us that we confess in the first article, all of these things that God gives and preserves, they are good things, but we live under the cross. This is not our home, but while we are here, we love and serve our neighbor. God doesn't need our good works, but our neighbor does, and we need to know how to relate to him. The 8th commandment says, "You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor." We should fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. The Progymnasmata teaches and forms our scholars in being 8th commandment abiders. The scholars learn to speak well of their neighbor, but they also learn to condemn the actions or words of the neighbor that need condemning, but to be able to do that in the kindest way, for the sake of the neighbor, for his salvation. I would submit for your consideration that the Progymnasmata is the education or formation of the whole man. It is in accord with natural law. It affirms the 10 commandments. It teaches man how to relate to his neighbor for the sake of his neighbor, and it has stood the test of time. These things, the way that we ponder these things, the way we ponder how to relate to our neighbor, remember, these things don't come naturally. They need to be taught. And the Progymnasmata gives us the means by which we form our scholars in how they think so that they know how to serve. the Progymnasmata is formation in thinking, writing, and speaking. It's not a checklist. It's not just a series of writing exercises. It's bigger than that. And we should consider it. And finally, and I wasn't sure if I was brave enough to actually say this, but I'm going to, because, the worst that you can do is tell me that I'm a liar, but at least do it nicely. Perhaps, and let's wrestle with this together, perhaps the Progymnasmata is the lens through which we should view the formation of scholars, not stages of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. I know. I maybe should be strung up, tarred and feathered, and all the rest. Please make sure you have torches too. But if we don't, this is the beauty of getting together, right? Is that we can debate these things. Here I am giving you something to ponder. And wouldn't it be great if you could prove that I'm wrong? And wouldn't it be great if I could prove you're wrong? And maybe as we discuss these things, we realize that we're on the same page, but we just didn't have the words to think about it. And maybe the Progymnasmata gives us the words to think about it, or gives us a different way to think about it. But I would submit to you that this is what we want to form our young people. And it's not, hopefully you've seen, it's not just writing and orating, it's thinking in all content areas. Because remember, they're all parts of the whole. We don't do these things in isolation, and one thing impacts another regardless of whether you intend it to. It can't help but not impact another thing because God made it. And God is a God of order, and our scholars are made in the image of God, and those things matter. We need the liberal arts to distinguish God's voice from the devil's and to equip ourselves to rightly be good stewards of all resources and serve God through our neighbor. Thank you.
Go back to your pitchfork and torches slide.
Yes! Okay.
I love Progym, and I completely agree with you that Progym works directly in a grammar, logic, and rhetoric stage. I think something that would help this group is we see grammar as kindergarten through 5th grade, logic is 4th through 8th, rhetoric is high school, so we're not going to get there anyway. And Progym is specific. You start at fables and narratives, which is very grammar. The narrative components, who, what, where, how, facts, all that stuff. And you move on to the logic stage, which would be Kriya and Maxim, and you kind of have to start to learn to formulate your argument in a logical order,
right,
and not just intro, body, conclusion, like
right,
Shirley would do. And rhetoric is the last 6 or so where it needs to sound good, otherwise nobody's going to listen to you anyway.
Right, right. You have to have something to back yourself up, or you're going to get run out of town. Like I might, but you know. All right, perfect. We'll go down together. But what I'm hoping is that the Progymnasmata can give you the tools to do. We're always wondering, okay, so how do we do classical, right? How do we do this thing? Well, the Progymnasmata teaches us how to do this thing. But if we just relegate it to exercises that we work through in a workbook, it's not going to do its thing, because it's going to become a checklist. And we can't let it become a checklist, because this is about how we think. All right, who's next? Yes, sir.
In less than 45 minutes, you accomplished what it took us a couple of days and 50-some pages at the Wyoming District Conference in October. So thank you. Yeah, one of the points that came out there was that because the various authors put these categories in different orders, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter as much that you go from here to here to here to here. You can kind of pick and choose as you find something you want to work on. And one of the points somebody made was in Conium. Yeah, I said that wrong. But yeah, they just in praise of the mosquito. All right, now write a paper praising the mosquito. Yeah, that's, you really have to think about that one.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And this gives us, I think, the legs by which to do these things. It gives us a sequential, operational, usable way to think and to form the thinking of our scholars.
So, I agree with your critique. I'm not sure that your answer is complete, and I'm not sure that you meant it to be. So,
right.
If what I say
I'm not
misses
easily
you,
offended.
that's fine.
It's okay. I actually carry tar and feathers with me, just for the sake of my neighbor, in case he needs them. Yes.
Right. So, I agree that this is an excellent way, a framework of teaching, a way of helping us to think, and but it seems to me that it could be used, like the liberal arts have been used, to create clever devils also. And so it seems that there is a good deal that is not here that must be in an education, right? That this is a good framework for how to teach, particularly the skills of language, particularly the skills of communication. That those skills of communication will be used for everything we learn. But that doesn't mean that they teach everything that we learn. Right? And so you said several times through there, this requires you to know this. This requires you to know this.
Right.
And not all those things are taught by the Progymnasmata, right?
Right.
And so there's a great deal of other things from the piety, not pietism, but piety, right? From piety through theology and philosophy that will need to be taught and can be taught by a teacher using this as a framework. And I love that. And it's a good way for both the teacher and the student. Right? It gives the teacher a framework in which to teach, and it gives the student a framework in which to learn. But it seems that there is a great deal more that we should be considering, even if you limit it to, for instance, the liberal arts. Progymnasmata does not teach arithmetic, does not teach geometry.
Correct.
Right? So, yes.
Right, and to that, I would say I agree. But it also allows us to keep at the fore relationship, right? And to be able to let the order of arithmetic and geometry and all of these things be our proof for how we relate. Right? Because there is order, because there is absolute truth, and I'm not saying that we use the Progymnasmata to teach arithmetic, but I'm saying that they aren't opposed to one another, right? And so this is why, but this gives us the framework to approach some of these other things that I would submit have been approached very poorly, in terms of, the quadrivium has really, and natural philosophy, we don't have time for that hobby horse today, but another day. Right. Yeah. That's in my car. No, but in terms of these, we have failed to understand them rightly, because we've settled where we're comfortable, and we haven't allowed ourselves to look elsewhere. I mean, there's no reason. I mean, just in terms of geometry's easy, right? But geometry and ethics, for example, are a beautiful match. And if you're not teaching geometry and ethics in tandem, rethink the way that you're teaching geometry. Because geometry and ethics really support one another wholeheartedly. And we should consider how these things relate, right? I get that we don't a lot of times have time to step outside of the box and look at what we're doing. But I would submit to you that if you've just done what you do because that's what you've always done, reconsider it. So, but yes, I agree. This is not, I would not apply the Progymnasmata to teaching arithmetic. Maybe.
Yeah.
But given enough time, I bet I could make a case for it.
I think that goes to one of the points you made, which is that the relegating of any discipline that we teach to the doing of exercises in the workbook destroys the thing.
Yes.
And that is true of arithmetic as it is of the Progymnasmata.
Yes.
And maybe we should reconsider how we teach arithmetic.
Amen.
So, yeah.
I'm right there with you. I'll share my tar and feathers with you. Awesome. All right. Anyone else? I would recommend, if your school does not do anything with the Progymnasmata, that before you go out and buy anything, that you read this book first. It's a little bit heady, but you guys are smart and you can handle it. And it will force you to rethink everything that you do, which is a good thing. Okay? Part of the reason that we teach is so that we can learn. So don't go buy anything except this book. And then think. Okay? And ponder this, wrestle with this as a faculty. Okay? And this is, if nothing else, it will get you talking about what you teach. And maybe you'll even be crazy enough to say, okay, so how could we apply the Progymnasmata to teaching arithmetic? Right? And then you'll write the textbook, and it'll be awesome, and I'll buy it. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. It is Progymnasmata, Greek textbooks of prose, composition, and rhetoric, translated with introductions and notes by George A. Kennedy. I'll have it at the Wittenberg Academy display. You can come take a picture of it. Or I'll be up here and you can come take a picture of it. Or email me and I'll send you a link. So it'll be great. All right. Thank you, guys.